Welcome, Supercast subscribers, to Moments in Leadership. Before we get started, look, I'm sorry for the gap in the episodes this summer. In addition to a 2-week vacation that I took, I have a family member who has had to move in full-time, who needed full-time supervision here in my house, and it really impacted my life. But thankfully, I've secured assisted living, and I'm getting back on track. So just wanted to give you a heads up as to why there was such a gap there. So also, for listeners who have been keeping up with some of the most recent episodes, I've been trying to get this effort underwritten by a corporate sponsor. So I'm still asking for your help. If you or anyone in your network or your friend group or anything is affiliated with a company that caters to the military or veterans community, I'd really like to get this project underwritten by a company or two versus doing commercials, because I just don't like those things. So I'm not only thinking of large companies, but also like gear companies, defense contractors, clothing companies, ammo companies, stuff like that. Basically, any company that would have a table at SHOT Show or Modern Day Marine or something like that. So if you have any contacts there, I'd appreciate it. It'd be a great way to highlight a company's name to listeners and help me get my costs covered and keep this thing free for all of the emerging leaders who are out there downloading this and getting some great information from the guest interviews that are happening here. One of my biggest barriers to getting episodes out on the street is all this back-end editing. I mean, it is a lot. I had no idea how much this project was going to cost me in terms of time. So if I could outsource that to a professional, that's the problem I'm trying to solve for with this. And those people are expensive. So if you have any ideas or thoughts, please reach out to me on Instagram, LinkedIn, or by email at themilloffice@gmail.com. Anyway, that said, your support goes a long way towards covering the cost of this project, and I'm so grateful. But if you have any ideas, I'd really appreciate it. Reach out. Today's guest is Lieutenant Colonel, now Colonel Select Cameron McCoy, United States Marine Corps Reserves. I first met Lieutenant Colonel McCoy while attending a reserve integrated training exercise. At the time, I knew him as an accomplished Marine officer with an impressive operational background. And it wasn't until later, after reading his book, Contested Valor, African American Marines in the Age of Power, Protest, and Tokenism, that I became really interested in having him join me on the podcast. A native of Washington, D.C., Lieutenant Colonel McCoy has commanded at every level, from leading a reconnaissance platoon during Operation Iraqi Freedom to serving as a battalion commander for 3rd Battalion, 23rd Marine Regiment. His assignments have taken him from Seoul, Korea, where he served as an operational planner for United States Marine Forces Korea, to the forefront of cyber operations as the director of Commander's Action Group at U.S. Cybercom. He has also trained the next generation of Marines at the School of Infantry East, commanded both infantry and reconnaissance units, and has served in strategic and operational planning roles across the Joint Force. Beyond his military career, Lieutenant Colonel McCoy is a scholar and an educator. He holds degrees from Brigham Young University, Texas A&M, the University of Texas at Austin, and the United States Naval War College, where he earned the Advanced Strategist designation. He has taught at West Point, the U.S. Air Force Academy, and Brigham Young University, and served as an Ines Family Foundation Fellow at the National World War II Museum's Jenny Craig Institute for the Study of War and Democracy. And with that, welcome, Lieutenant Colonel McCoy. However, recently discovered Colonel Select, great, congratulations, but also known as Dr. Cameron McCoy. So welcome to all three of you to the podcast.
Thanks a lot, Dave. I appreciate you having me on. This is an honor and a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on because you're also the author of a book called Contested Valor, which is fantastic. And I'll put the link to that in the show notes so people can check that out. I'm definitely going to ask you some questions about that. I always feel weird asking questions about books that people write, because I feel like if I ask a question, the answer's in the book, I'm just asking a question that everybody already knows the answer to. So I really try not to do that. But it was a fascinating book. I'm going to ask you a couple questions, just like any other podcast that I start with my guests. I would just love to hear a little bit about you, your first 5 years in the Marine Corps. What's your origin story? Like, how did you get started in the Marine Corps? And then I'd love to launch into like, what was Second Lieutenant McCoy like?
Well, when I first came in the Marine Corps, I actually was 17. I enlisted. And that really was a very pivotal time in my life because a kid, I grew up in Washington, D.C., right in the district, was born in Southeast Washington, D.C., grew up in Northwest Washington, D.C. Not a rich kid like it is today, like if you go to that area. But that really was a pivotal time for me and just understanding being away from home at 17. Now, I don't really have a lot of great stories from that lead into where we are today. I was enlisted, did infantry, then did MSG duty, got out, went to college, got commissioned, senior year in college. I'm at Brigham Young University, and I'm finishing my final year, and school had just started, and that was when 9/11 occurred.
Hmm.
So I graduated in April 2002. I get commissioned July 3rd, 2002. So those first 5 years were really just uncertain. There was uncertainty just in the air the entire time.
Did you ROTC or PLC, or what was your commissioning source?
PLC, I did
Okay.
PLC.
Oh, and one more clarifier there. All right. Black boots or tan boots? What was your first issue?
Black boots were my
Okay,
first thing.
me too, man. All right, good. So you know the pain. You know the
Yes,
pain. Right.
exactly, exactly. The transition, everyone welcomed with open arms
Right.
to the tan boots. Yeah, I don't even think people even know the term spit shining. So that was always interesting. But I come in, Dave, and my mom and dad are really concerned because they understand the state of affairs in the world. And I really didn't think much about it. I just saw what occurred on 9/11 while I was a college student. And really, I was eager to just serve the nation again. I had no plans on going back into the Marine Corps, but had gone through PLC, was really on the fence about it because I had gotten an offer from Dell Computers in Austin, Texas. And they offered to pay for my MBA at the University of Texas at Austin, which is funny because that's where I did my PhD. I did my
Right.
doctorate. But I turned that down. They leave the door open for me. But I go in and I decide this is what I want to do. I didn't know if I was going to do 20 years or not. And you know how it is when you come into the Marine Corps, it's really harsh, regardless whether it's peacetime or wartime. I come in, I get commissioned as second lieutenant. I go through the basic school. I was Bravo Company. And we started in January, went from January to June. And I had no idea of the rankings, the thirds at the basic school, the top third, the middle third, the bottom third. I didn't know that you got evaluated by your peers or spear evals, right? Because it's
Yeah.
in the back. And so that was just new to me and understanding how to navigate that. And so many people came in at so many different intellectual levels and knowledge levels about the Marine Corps. I definitely was at the bottom when it came to being an officer. So
Even given your prior enlisted time.
even given prior enlisted, because Dave, you you had to be more refined. I was rough around the edges. I was still young, like I
Yeah.
just to
Right.
say what I wanted to say and not think about the consequences. And it really, I wouldn't say it hurt me, but I had some tough, some hard lessons that I learned in the basic school was a proving ground for that, where I was able to cut my teeth on, okay, this is what it means to be an officer, right? And this is what it means for you to be a leader. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, but also, Dave, being a black officer, I didn't realize what that meant, and that's part of really why I wrote Contested Valor because I got a good friend of mine who's Colonel Robert May. He goes by Bobby. Bobby May actually just got selected to be the CEO of SOI East. We were running the endurance course through IOC, and he just mentioned Montfort Point, and I know you read this in the preface of the book, but that was really where I started to really understand things was at IOC. So I get
Mhm.
selected, I get infantry, I'm assigned infantry, right? Because at the base school you do not pick your MOS. So I'm assigned infantry on May 15th, 2003. You're like, how the hell do you remember that specific date? Because it was a critical day. And also the Matrix Reloaded came out that day, so it was a Friday. But I get infantry. There were only 19 infantry slots available. I did not know that infantry was such a coveted MOS either at that time. So again, Dave, these are all things I'm learning about this process of becoming a Marine officer. So I go through IOC. Before we even finish IOC, I know my duty station and I know exactly when I'm going to deploy to Afghanistan. That's exactly what I'm told. I mean, we are there. I get told as soon as we graduate, you need to go directly to 29 Palms to 27 and be ready to deploy. And I did exactly that. I graduated IOC October 17, 2003. I don't waste any time. I drive directly from Quantico, Virginia to 29 Palms, California. And it's just a madhouse, just trying to find things to do, trying to understand what I'm supposed to do as an infantry officer, as a second lieutenant. And really, you just in a you just don't know. You just like no one's ever done this before. So I get to my first duty station. I'm in Golf Company 27. I have an incredible company XO. His name's Javier Zavala. Great friend today, just absolutely brilliant officer, one of the best men I've ever met in my entire life. And he really guides me through the process of becoming a platoon commander. And while he's doing that, we only have just a few months. So I get there, we check into the battalion November 7th, 2003. We deployed February 14th, Valentine's Day 2004. And that first leading a platoon, right? Every infantry, I was just like, yeah, I get to lead guys in the war, combat. And it felt that I had reached the peak of my career at that time, Dave. That's how I felt as a second lieutenant. And it really was a traumatic experience, not in the sense that it left these emotional scars that I can't shake, but just there's a lot of trauma involved in not only growing, but leading all at the same time.
Hmm.
A group of people who are going through the exact same process as you, but their different expectations are placed upon their shoulders. And so that would the first we get into country. Before we leave country in September, we're told exactly when we're coming back. And I think that was a shock to many people that we many of us just thought, okay, we're going to do our 7 or 8 months there. We'll be done. We come home and we'll just figure this out later. And when that cycle began in 2004, it really had a psychological effect that I know that I was not prepared for, but was able to manage. And as I reflect upon that, it really highlighted to me how just the nation, the Marine Corps wasn't prepared on the human capital level as it may have thought it was. And so I deployed a second time back to Fallujah. And then I'm really just exhausted from prepping for deployment, deploying, just really tired. And that began to just weigh on me about my decision if I wanted to stay in or not. And I get done with that deployment, have a tragic event where we lost 10, we had 10 KIA and an IED blast. And it started making me reflect on a lot of things. And I lost my closest friend at that time, Dan Clay, Staff Sergeant Dan Clay, who another incredible man. I hold him alongside Javier at the same level, just an incredible young man who was taken too soon. And so I come back after that deployment, I think get orders to SOI East. I'm a first lieutenant at this time. And while at SOI East, I get selected for captain. And so it was really just fast, those first few years. And so when I pin on captain, right, I think it's like I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I know I felt like this. I felt like I was a made man when I pinned on captain.
Yeah.
Like, as if like, okay, no one can tell me anything. I'm smart. I can realize every time I get promoted, I'm like, oh my gosh, you
Yeah.
don't know as much as you think.
The great thing about a captain is you can be a captain for a day or captain for 5 years. I mean, you can be a day away from pinning on major or a day time and grade and captain, and nobody really kind of knows. So captain's one of the really great ranks because you're sort of you really don't know how lieutenants are lieutenants, right? Every lieutenant has less than 4 or 5 years, and that's kind of easy to figure out. But then captains, you're like, you don't really know, and it's a little empowered. Like I first, okay, no one's lying when they say captain is the best officer rank there is. It's like captain and sergeant, the best two ranks. It's kind of true, but
Oh no, I agree. I agree, but yeah, I look back and I was just so tired of being a lieutenant. I was just so
yeah,
sick of it. And so when you pin on captain, it's just this relief. You're like, oh, hallelujah, I'm an adult now.
right,
And as you know this, and we joke about this as Marines, right? We're like, why do you always feel like a second lieutenant? I'm like, even as a lieutenant colonel, I'm like, why do I always feel like a second lieutenant all the time as a Marine?
right,
But it's true. I mean, pinned on captain, and it's really felt I had graduated to a new level, right? As a made man, and just the expectations changed. And you're really nervous. I was nervous about becoming a company commander. I become a company commander, and I had the right people around me. I mean, I had senior enlisted people, John Elliott, First Sergeant, Gunnery Sergeant John Preston. I mean, guys who really knew their trade, right? And as a second lieutenant and a first lieutenant, that's all I'm focused on is learning my job, right? That was the most important thing for me is learning my job as a young infantry officer. And then as a captain, right, that's where it becomes more practicum, where you're really practicing everything that you've done as a lieutenant. And so that was really the first time I felt, okay, there are more levers to leadership here, and how do I pull them and engage in right?
Reflecting back on your lieutenant time, because you had those back-to-back deployments, you were really tired, but if you were to think about the things that shaped you, what were some of the wins, the failures? You mentioned some of the mentors, but like what were some of those things that really shaped you leading into that, you know, at that time in your life, thinking like I've reached the pinnacle of my life as a captain? What were some of those wins and failures as a lieutenant? And answer that in the context of like, what would a lieutenant listening to this learn from that, your wins and your failures?
The wins, believe it or not, is when I knew to stay silent, knowing when to stay silent and listen. And for me, that was any opportunity that I had really to listen to the battalion commander and what he was seeing. And I didn't understand it. It was very difficult to make those connections. And also listening to other captains and their transition from being lieutenants and then going through EWS, Expeditionary Warfare School, and what that meant having formal PME, professional military education, coming back to the fleet and then leading, and how they applied that. And those were wins for me. It, Dave, it really was watching what I didn't want to become. You could just see so many leaders where you're like, okay, don't do that, this might work. You don't have the personality for that. And it was really becoming more comfortable in my skin, is where I saw the wins. It's just people are going to know who you are immediately, the same way you know who other people are when they walk in a room. So, hey, if you're going to fail, fail being yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And really just, I found that listening to my subordinate, not too much, but listening to my platoon sergeant in the beginning as a lieutenant and really contextualizing how he saw the platoon versus how I saw the platoon and what I knew the platoon needed based on my conversations with the company commander or the company XO. And so, as a lieutenant, when I was coming in, the biggest thing for me, the wins were really honing your craft, really honing in on, okay, for what we are assigned to do, what is asked of me, how can I refine that to the best way possible? Because you don't have as much power or authority as you think as a lieutenant. And I think that gets in the way sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, another win, and I guess, yeah, another win was just really having the insight of, hey, Cameron, there were lieutenants who came before you, there are going to be lieutenants who come after you. And really keeping that in front of me, Dave, about not getting too big of a head. Because I had an ego, right? I still do, but understanding how to manage it was I felt was a win. Becoming a rifle platoon commander was a huge win for understanding how to manage my ego. The
Mm-hmm.
failures, oh my gosh, just silliness that you just can't, saying the wrong thing when the company commander's talking. We had this incident, Dave, where, oh gosh, something happened. We're coming out of Fallujah. My company commander, Captain Doug Downey, we had some negligent discharges, just it coming in and off the camp, and he's frustrated out of his mind. And he's like, "We got this, five, 6 rounds going off. Everybody's just the gun barrels just negligent discharges. What's next?" And I said, 762. And as a round, and I said 9 millimeter, and he just lost it. And I just said, yeah, I thought it was an opening for some comedic relief.
Right.
Not no, yeah, yeah, just the timing on that, just understanding when someone's talking about something that's serious, it's not the time to crack a joke.
But hysterical now when you now you hear the
Oh,
story.
my buddy Javier always laughs at me about it. I mean, my nickname was 762 for a long time.
Oh,
So
that's funny. That's a great call sign though.
yeah, and so I think just really as we talk a little bit more, my failures came more as a field grade, less so as a captain, right? I just had such right the proximity to senior enlisted leadership was so critical to my success. And those Marines just ensured that I would be successful becoming a major and more specifically becoming a battalion commander, being a lieutenant colonel. That's where I could see my failures more, where I may have said the wrong thing or intimated something, and then my subordinates decided they wanted to act on it. And
Yeah.
so I had to learn really quickly not to think out loud a lot. And so that probably was the quickest lesson. I mean, it's the only thing that I can really associate with being a failure, Dave, was just learning not to think out loud.
Mhm. That's an interesting observation because probably everybody's guilty of it. There's probably a whole bunch of captains listening to it that are saying, "Oh, first time a field grade officer admits they had a failure." Right? So
Oh,
I can
I
hear
got
people.
plenty of them. I've got plenty. I have plenty of them.
Yeah, but that's a great one too because I'm probably really guilty of that too, just thinking out loud. We probably all do it a lot more than we think.
Agreed, Dave. It's just right. We're always us, right? I was sharing this with a general's aide when I just came from Cybercom. We were just sitting down talking, and her and I can't remember. I just got the news I was selected for colonel, and she said, "Congratulations, sir." And we were in a meeting. We were doing a calendar sync with the general, and I said, "You know what, Eleanor? Still me." And she she just laughed. She said, "You rarely hear an officer say that." And I said, "Put the rank on. Don't put the. I'm still me, right? Still going to
Mhm.
make mistakes the way I make mistakes." And I think for her, it helped her. She was a lieutenant JG in the Navy. She just kind of saw, it's true, right? Regardless of the rank, you're still going to be who you are.
Right. We're talking about failures. I'll just stick on that for a second and I'm going to replace failure with mistake, but like I look, mistakes are some of the life's best teachers, whether you like them or not. Sometimes they're catastrophic, like the person on the Coldplay camera, lately. I mean, in and of itself, these mistakes are all life's best teachers. What's one that really stuck with you in your career? And to the extent that it made it up your chain of command, how was it handled by your chain of command?
Oh, we had an incident in which I was not directly involved, but I had come on the scene. We had some Marines actually, they blew up a Humvee
A Humvee.
in country. Yeah, so we're in Iraq. They blew up a Humvee. And all the lieutenants got called in. And one of the things that I took away from that when we look at mistakes or failures was, well, how am I going to respond to this? Because we all were just getting torn a new one. And I remember specifically just thinking about Dave that it really was just how the battalion commander responded to it. I just was focused on how he responded to it. He wasn't going to change whether or not I had respect for him or whether or not I liked him. It wasn't important. But what I found to be most important was his engagement with me as a lieutenant, his engagement with the company commander, who was a captain. And I really felt when I walked into the room, this is a high leverage moment right now that really could set the course for how I develop as a leader more than anything else. And while Lieutenant Colonel Scooter was not pleased, I respected him for how he handled it. He ensured that the right people were held accountable and that we understood what the ramifications would be. And he wasn't kind when he did it, but I understood it. I understood why he was emotional about it because he was juggling a lot.
Hmm.
And so for me, when I looked at that, Dave, I looked at it through a lens of, okay, what am I going to take away from this when this is over? Because knowing I made the mistake or knowing I had been involved, it was already over, right? So you knew you made the mistake. But I looked at it as, okay, what can I learn from this? And as I reflect on it, right, I'm able to say that a little bit more eloquently than I did when I was a first lieutenant, right? It's easy now because I have different language skills and different ways of interpreting life and situations with my growth as a person and as a Marine officer. But I do remember that standing out the most to me was, I wonder how he's going to respond to this and what tone that's going to set.
Hmm.
And so I don't know if that's really answering your question, but I remember just thinking that because, Dave, at that time, and you know this, you were always in trouble as a lieutenant. You were just always in trouble. You always were doing something stupid. So it didn't matter. And I had a conversation recently with one of my former company commanders where I called him and apologized. He's been retired for a few years. I said, Donnie, I'm so sorry for what I put you through when I was a lieutenant. He said, it's okay. Just apologized to him. Like, I'm so sorry. He and I were able to kiss and make up. It's just one of those things you're always just learning through this process of tripping over yourself. And the biggest thing that I discovered from that is just each leader responds to that in various ways.
Yeah, I think, all right, I'm not calling anybody out, but I'll just say it. Like, there are some captains that I served under as a lieutenant that owe me an apology. However, those formative moments of enduring some of that bullshit made me a better battery commander. I think. Right? It's that old adage, like, you can learn as much from seeing bad leaders as you can good leaders. Maybe that's a great segue into my next question, which is, what are some of the best lessons you were taught by the worst leaders you saw? I'm not saying you have to say but like, you probably saw bad leadership even if you weren't in that chain of command, and you've had a really extensive career. You're infantry officer, combat veteran. Do you have some vignettes to share with listeners about that they can walk away from, and maybe walk away from it the same way you and I walked away from it with, hey, I'm not going to emulate that sort of behavior.
I had one company commander, and just I want to protect his identity. He made life difficult, like more than it should have been.
Hmm.
And what I learned from him was never to turn a cold shoulder to someone seeking guidance, even though you believe they should already know it, but coming to you being vulnerable. More than anything else, Dave, just recognizing that vulnerability. And then the infantry community is infantry officers aren't taught about emotional intelligence in the way that most people can learn it on highly professional levels. And he had a way of leading that I had no problem with. But what I found was it was always difficult just to have a relaxing conversation with him on trying to, how can I develop in this way? And he had extensive experience, highly talented, in shape. He had done all the work to be where he was. And I just felt like, why is this so difficult? What is so difficult about the mentorship portion of your assignment as a company commander? And I just could not understand that, just like why that was so difficult. As I matured, I understood, right? There are a lot of things that he was leveraging. He was trying to leverage his career all at the same time while leading the company, right? And you and I understand how that works, where You're trying to achieve certain milestones, but at the same time, you also have to lead. And so you're on this scale where you're counterbalancing as best as you possibly can. And then to have some young punk lieutenant like myself who also thinks who's a know-it-all, who thinks I'm really good, trying to genuinely come to you for advice, guidance, right? That's not always at the top of your list because there are other things going on. And what I learned was leadership is always inconvenient. It's always inconvenient. Someone's just going to come up to you at an inconvenient time and need some information and need some guidance. And just because it's inconvenient doesn't mean it has to be shelved or put into cold storage until later. And so that was what I learned from him. He and I, we get along great, but that was the one thing that was really hard. And it was during combat, it was my toughest tour. And it was the hardest 7 months of my life in uniform as a Marine. And I just really was looking for.
Yeah. I remember back, I don't remember how long ago this was. And it's not so long. I don't think I'm inventing this in my mind, but I think there was some effort to sort of institutionalize a mentorship program in the Marine Corps. And I always felt like if you try to institutionalize mentorship, it doesn't really work. People seek out mentorship from people that they like and respect because they genuinely want to know. And in a way, it's one of the most ultimate compliments you can get as a leader is if somebody comes up and asks you for guidance or mentorship. And it's probably a lot of destruction done there to the junior individual who's looking for the guidance if they get blown off or shelved. And I think that's part of maturing as a leader is understanding that when people do come to you and ask you for guidance or mentorship, that you're in a position to either do a lot of good or a lot of bad right at that immediate point in time when it's happening. Because if you get blown off, well, and here's the other thing. If no one's coming and asking you for mentorship and guidance, you should probably take a look inside yourself and ask yourself, geez, why doesn't anybody want my opinion or my mentorship or guidance? And probably answer your own question there. But yeah, interesting. Okay, transitioning into another question here, but it's attached. But reflect back later on in your career, let's say like battalion commander ish time frame. When you were making big calls as a more senior leader as a battalion commander, did any of those early experiences from your lieutenant and captain time come back to guide you? And if so, could you give an example?
I will say this: I cannot recall reflecting on lieutenant when I was a battalion commander. I do remember reflecting a lot on being a company commander, being a captain, and how that it informed my decisions as a battalion commander. Didn't guide, but just informed.
Mm-hmm.
Really, when it just came simply to punitive measures, that was it, Dave. When it came to things that were punitive, because I wanted to handle it with sensitivity and understand the long range of consequences that would go with that. And the biggest thing that I took away from being a company commander, the number one thing that informed my time as a battalion commander was do not create, do not think that you're solving a problem right now and understand that it will probably be a problem for the next battalion commander. So it was what you're creating right now could potentially be a problem for the next battalion commander. While it's solving an issue now, it will be a problem later for that next battalion commander. So I kept that in mind because when I was a company commander, I ran into a lot of that. Where the previous company commander had done all of these things, like these are all problems now. And so as a battalion commander, I was so cognizant of my actions regarding that level of thinking of do not create new problems for the next person that comes in.
Yeah, that's great advice. You did your company command at an LAR battalion, correct?
No, it's interesting you bring that up. So I did my company command time at SOI East and then
Oh,
4th Recon Battalion. So
okay.
4th Recon Battalion is where I have full domain of my company. And so that was for actually was there for 3 years as a company commander. Or
Oh, that's a great tour. Now,
yeah, it was.
were you a major then? Because
I
that
was a
was
major
reserve,
then.
right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah.
I was a major select, arrived there as a captain, and then 8 months later got promoted to major and then yeah, spent that time there.
Okay. What years was that?
That was 2011, end of 2011. So November 2011, I took over and then left May 2014.
Okay, who were the battalion commanders in the INIs during that time?
Dion Anglin was my battalion commander. The first INI was a guy named Tylee Nunnick. And then the second INI was a guy named Bruce. I can't believe I remember these names. Bruce Soter.
Okay,
He was the INI. Rob Coates was the first battalion commander, but he left. I mean, he was there for 5 minutes. And then
okay,
Dion Anglin took over as battalion commander.
okay. Interesting. I was just wondering if I was going to recognize any of those names. But how was that going from the regular infantry world and then SOI, and then I'm assuming that was your first time in the reserves with command. Was How was that transition? Because I think a lot, I shouldn't say a lot, I bet you there's a fair amount of people that listen to this podcast that are at some point in their career where they're like, I like the Marine Corps, I'm going to get off active duty, I'm thinking about staying in the reserves, and then they find themselves in this command structure in the reserves, which is really, I mean, it's a lot different. It requires a real adjustment coming off of active duty into the reserves. And maybe you could share some experiences that you had there with command on active duty versus command in the reserves, because I do think they're two different animals.
Okay, so I got lucky. So my final year on active duty, I deployed for a year to Iraq with the reserve unit. I augmented.
Okay.
So Dave, that let me into seeing how things worked. So my transition off active duty to the reserves was pretty seamless. I just had to learn the nuances of what points meant, how to get points, how not to lose points towards retirement. That was the biggest thing. But I remember the first lesson that I learned was how you would talk to a reservist, and you needed to
Hmm.
be very careful, whether they were an NCO or another officer. I remember, and when I augmented this reserve unit, I augmented 225 out of Gardens. At that time, it was Garden City, New York. They were Empire Battalion. Jeff Rollins was the battalion commander at that time. My buddy, a good close friend of mine, his name's James Colvin. He ended up being the battalion commander
Oh
for
yeah,
225, while I was the battalion commander, yeah, for 223. James is an incredible Marine, and
yeah. He's a
absolutely,
firefighter, right? Is he a
yes,
firefighter? Yeah,
yes, he
yeah,
is. He still is, doing just incredible things. I would be lost in a lot of areas without his friendship. So I kind of learned some things, and I had to quickly learn that while you are an officer and while the Marine Corps does work on a very strict system of disciplined, instant will, obedience to orders, that you really could be talking to a multimillionaire who's an E4 or an E5.
yeah.
And they could buy your salaries 20 times over. And
Right.
so I remember, Dave, I remember that lesson sticking out to me because we had two Marines who were like that, corporal and a sergeant, both multimillionaires. And they run their companies, they work for these huge firms, and to protect protecting their identity. And I would sit down and have conversations with them. And I remember someone was yelling at them one day about something and said, "You know, these guys don't need the reserves. They just love the Marine Corps."
Right.
And I said, let's make sure we keep these guys here because they can help us on an intellectual level, on a tactical level, but more importantly, on a strategic level about how we do things. And I felt we were missing the boat on that of how to leverage all of these strengths through Marines who come from very diverse backgrounds, professions, and outlooks and frameworks of life. And that was something that really I carried with me all the way through. And it really helped me in the reserves a ton.
Yeah, I'll bet. I had a dissimilar experience and a similar experience. And since it's not my episode, I won't get into too much of the stories, but I was a complete disaster as a captain when I came off of active duty and joined a reserve unit. It was a reserve tank company. I had spent a year going to Fort Knox and retraining to gain the tank MOS because it was the only MOS in the reserves that you couldn't kind of OJT your way into. So I showed up at this tank company. It was a terrible year and a half of experience for me. It was it was all my fault. I was just running too hot, coming off of deployments, and it wasn't until I came back into the reserves after 9/11 that I had kind of cooled off and figured it all out. But the interesting thing about the reserves to me, and I hope people hear this for the way I'm saying it, is that like you were saying, the reserves are such a diverse group of people. You can have folks in law school and they're corporals, and you can have cops and firefighters and systems engineers and generator mechanics and heavy equipment operators. And it always surprised me every time I'd say, hey, we've got this problem we need to tackle. And somebody would say, like, oh, let's get good Corporal Johnson because in his civilian career, he's an XYZ. And the next thing you
Yep,
know,
exactly.
this generator that you couldn't get working for 3 years is all of a sudden working in 15 minutes because, somebody ran to Home Depot and got some parts off my credit card or something like that. I mean, it was amazing, all these people and all the things they can do. And if we needed a first aid class taught, boy, you just get one of the EMS Marines, that ran an ambulance on his civilian world. But it was crazy. And but what I learned about the reserves was that, and I get it, the active duty folks will always kind of like make fun of the reserves a little bit, just like Marines make fun of the Air Force guys. We kind of mean it, we kind of don't. It's all in good fun. I get it. But for the folks who are like serious about hating on the reserves, I'll tell you this: I've never met anybody that came off of active duty and joined the reserves and said, this was as screwed up as I thought it was going to be. They always say the opposite. They always say,
Why didn't
wow,
I do this
well,
sooner?
yeah, or right, or this is wow. I mean, yeah, it's totally different, and I get it. Maybe there's a couple more pudgy guys running around. Yeah, that's true. There are, and maybe there are a couple folks who just hide and slide in the reserves, and they get that reputation too. And I get that, but man, I tell you, the reserves, you give them a 45-day workup, and they're going to run. They're going to run just as hard as any active duty company or battery that's around.
And I want to at least address the second part of your question really quickly. Dave, I have to be transparent here. So going into a recon unit, it was slightly different, right? Those guys really are invested. They've gone through jump school, dive school. So when I came in, even though I was kind of still fresh on active duty, they appreciated that, right? Because these guys all wanted to be pushed.
Yeah,
And so, right, I kind of got lucky with this easy off ramp coming off active duty and then into fourth recon because these guys all wanted to be pushed. The biggest problem we had were just drug pops. That was the biggest challenge to my time being there were just drug pops.
right. Yeah, I think the only problems that I ever had, I only ran one NJP when I was a battery commander, and it was for like somebody stole a helmet from another Marine or something silly like that. It was never the DUIs, it was never any of that stuff. And the only time I ever had any sort of issues that got into a gray area was if we were having like a mess night or something like that, and there was a couple drinks involved or something like that, and some people would get out of line. But I never dealt with discipline problems. I
Yeah,
would have a formation at 07, everybody was there.
yes, yeah, absolutely. You just never. And when I talk about drug pops, it wasn't anything significant to a point where we were like, "What the hell is going on?" That wasn't it. It was just like, why do we keep getting these so intermittently? Like it was just always the same thing. It wasn't anything that I felt is destroying unit morale or cohesion.
Right, right. So as you became more senior in your career, go up until now even, did you find decisions getting harder and harder as you became more senior? Or do you think, are the decisions just as hard when you're older as they are when you're younger? They just have deeper ramifications.
Yeah, the latter. It's just they're always challenging. The biggest thing is just finding the team to surround yourself with. That's what I found. Just you have to get that right because the team is what is going to end up driving. As a battalion commander, they drove my battalion. I had to make sure I got the right team.
Right.
And the biggest thing was just not shelving people or pushing people aside that other people had problems with. So I had an officer. Actually, today is his birthday, and he had come with a reputation, and I didn't see it at all. I didn't. I didn't at all. He ended up being one of my best company commanders. He just needed the right type of environment. I am not saying that I was the right type of leader, but I knew how to set the conditions for him to thrive. And we just had open communication. What I find and what I continue to find and what I have found is I had to set the tone for communication. If I did not set the tone for communication with my subordinate commanders, then we would be toast. That never happened. But I understood its value because of how successful the units that I had stewardship over functioned. And so I found that that was just the biggest thing, is how I communicated and set those conditions.
Real quick plug, I've been trying to get this effort underwritten by a corporate sponsor, so I'm asking for your help. If you or anyone you know is affiliated with a company that caters to the military or veterans community, I'd ultimately like to get this project underwritten by a company. So please reach out to me at themilloffice@gmail.com. You can DM me on Instagram at themilloffice or over my LinkedIn account. My personal account is David B. Armstrong, CFA, or the Mill Office LinkedIn account as well. Now back to the pod. That's a great answer. Thanks for sharing that. I want to shift gears and talk about courage, because I think there's a difference between moral courage and battlefield courage. And because you have combat time, I feel like you're really well positioned to answer this question. But I feel like moral courage can be just as critical and, frankly, just as risky as battlefield courage. And I'm wondering if there was ever a moment you made a decision that could have put your, or did put your career on the line simply because it was the right thing to do, which is sort of the definition of moral courage.
That's a tough question. I'll give you a recent example. I'm not sure it put my career on the line, but I definitely, it may have gotten fired as a battalion commander.
I would say those are kind of the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. I guess so.
Yeah.
As a lieutenant colonel, Dave, like you kind of are like, well, I did. I'm at 20. I'm okay.
Right.
So we're at ITX. Actually, we're at ITX when you come out with Lieutenant General Bella.
Right.
This happened. This actually happened while you were there.
Okay.
So we're at the range. Colonel Quentin Jones is the regimental commander for 23rd Marine Regiment. I'm the battalion commander. We're doing our ITX, and he had just given strict orders. There will be no fire. It was just so hot there, but he gave a time window when we could fire weapons and when we couldn't. I am in my vehicle coming from the range. We shut them down. I make sure all my company commanders are good with chow, water, whatever they need. I'm going to each range. Everybody's shut down. I'm driving away. And the civilian range safety officer comes over. He pulls us over. He recognizes the vehicle that we had. And he says, Lieutenant Colonel McCoy, do you have a moment? I said, yes. He said, I'm letting you know that I'm going to call Colonel Jones and tell him that one of your companies was firing when they shouldn't have. And I said, hang on a second. Could you tell me what happened? So at least I'm informed before he chews my butt. So he says, hey, this is exactly what happened and occurred. And I'll never forget the civilian. He had a problem with some of my Marines. You know how Marines get. We will say horrible things about civilians just from a physical appearance standpoint. We're
Sure.
terrible at
Mm-hmm.
times. Not all the time, but at times. And people had kind of just treated him as a pushover. I had not. So he comes to me and he says, I'm going to make the call right now. And I said, hey, can you give me a moment? I said, can you just give me 10 minutes to talk to the company commander first? I will call Colonel Jones myself and tell him exactly what happened. And the guy gave me this look like, you would do that? And he says, are you sure? And I said, you have my word. As soon as I finished talking to him, I said, you can stay right here. I said, as soon as I'm done talking to Scott, I will tell you, I will call Colonel Jones immediately. You can stay right here. And the guy just immediately was like, unbelievable. And I got the story from Scott, called Colonel Jones. Colonel Jones, here's exactly what happened. I said, I'm responsible for this. I take full accountability. My guys started firing on the range, right? And I said, I need to just come. And he said, come see me now. The range guy, the civilian, was just like, he says, I've never seen a Marine officer ever do that. Admit he was wrong. And I said, no, it wasn't about admitting I was wrong. It's just taking accountability. And I knew what was coming, Dave. I knew it was over. I knew it was over. And before I went to see Colonel James, I drove back out to talk to Scott. It's like, what the hell happened, Scott? And he's upset. There's another company commander out there named Joe, because he's like, sir, I was trying. I was like, look, just tell me what happened. I want to tell him the truth. And we move past this. You're fine. I get back and Colonel Joe's like in my office now. He's like, "What the hell was going on? Didn't I make it clear that these were the tastes? I just said this." And then he kind of talking to the air. He's like, "Why is no one listening?" And I said, "Sir, here's exactly what happened. The Marines had things set up. What they were trying to do is get ahead, showing initiative, and be able to make the first run the moment we were given the green flag." I said, "That's what they were doing." I said, "I don't have a problem with a mistake. And this, I said, I would have a problem with a lack of discipline." And I said, "Sir, the way I see it, this was not a lack of discipline. This was just a mistake in trying to do things better so we could have better training."
Hmm.
And that's how I saw this, sir. I said, "Please don't touch my company commanders. This is all on me. I was not clear enough. And that's on me. You told me something. I obviously did not communicate it clear enough." And he just said, "No, I'm going to go." And this is the day I stood up to him. He says, "No, I'm going out there and I'm going to take care of this." And I said, "Sir, that's unnecessary." I said, "I can do it." I said, "It's my battalion." I said, "You gave it to me. Let me lead it. If you want to take care of somebody, take care of me, but let me handle my guys." And he paused for a second and was like, "All right, you said you got it?" I said, "I got it, sir." And there was a moment of silence and a pause there. And I love Colonel Jones. And he just said, "All right, you know how he used language. He's like, you mess it up. It's your ass." I said, "I got it, sir." He said, "Are we clear?" I said, "Crystal, sir." I
Yeah,
said, "I got it." He's like, "You were on the clock now." I said, "I got it, sir." And later on, we talked about it. And he said, we laughed about it, but I was really concerned just about how that would translate later. But I mean, he and I are friends till this day. And he was, he was the best leader I ever had.
that's great. Is he still in?
Yes, he is. He'll be retiring on September 5th.
Okay.
But
Sounds like he had a great career.
he was amazing. And he was able to really take my career and the way I approach leadership to the next level in ways that were unanticipated. I had not even expected. And he was able to really help me see things through a larger aperture of strategy when it came to leadership that no one else had done to that point. And frankly, Dave, I just wasn't ready for until I became a battalion commander. And he understood that.
That's great. One of the things that I found really interesting in your bio was that you've taught at West Point and you've taught at the Air Force Academy. And I'm curious if over the times of you teaching at those academies, you've watched probably thousands of leaders coming up through that academic system, up through the ranks, I'll call it. I'm wondering if you were able to observe what were the key turning points that tended to separate those young men and women who thrived from those who struggled.
Oh, as the culture, how they embraced the culture of their particular force. Those who understood the culture and knew how to leverage it and embrace it were successful because the culture really translated to character. And so what it did was it was a natural outgrowth of what their character would be. And so if they embraced the culture at the West Point, those academies, and United States Air Force Academy, that's when I saw success. Is how they embraced the culture of the academy.
That must have been a really interesting time in your life to be teaching and having an impact on folks who are working so hard to earn commissions and become those second lieutenants that we were just talking about 45 minutes ago. But,
And realizing just for the moment you got pinned on, you were king of the hill. Then
right, right. So Dr. McCoy has written a book and Contested Valor. And again, I'll put the to link to that in the show notes. I've got a couple questions about the book that I want to ask you about because the book is clearly about race. And one of the central tensions in Contested Valor is the difference between inclusion and tokenism. And I will say this almost as a disclaimer, like even saying the word tokenism is a little scary for me. I feel like that's just a word a white guy shouldn't use. And so I'm already uncomfortable here. But you describe throughout Marine Corps history that Black Marines were sometimes promoted or were even spotlighted as a form of symbolic progress, but without being fully included in decision making or leadership culture. And I'm wondering if you can take a little bit of time and talk about the tensions and the difference between inclusion and tokenism, because it's a central part of your book.
Yeah. So as I look through the nuances of that, right? The one thing is it's just I want to address those differences between inclusion and tokenism, and I want to ground my response in both historical reality and the personal stakes of these distinctions. So throughout Marine Corps history, yes, there have been moments when Black Marines were promoted or celebrated publicly, not as a result of true institutional acceptance, but as gestures of symbolic progress, right? Which you highlighted and is highlighted throughout them. But this kind of token representation, basically placing a few Black individuals in visible roles while denying them meaningful participation in leadership or decision making, serve more to project an image of progress without requiring substantive change in the core's power structures or culture. So tokenism provided only the appearance of diversity, often through minimal or performative gestures. So without ever addressing underlying barriers or empowering marginalized voices, right? I mean, this resulted in individuals being present but not truly valued, which led
Mm-hmm.
to feelings of isolation and marginalization. And so, thus, resisting tokenism requires more than representation. It demands systemic change and the elimination of barriers to full participation. Inclusion, by contrast, is about creating environments where people from all backgrounds are respected, heard, and able to contribute meaningfully. And it involves proactive and systemic efforts such as equal access to leadership, influence in decision making, and ongoing support to dismantle exclusion and ensure equity. So, moving from tokenism to real inclusion means prioritizing long term cultural transformation over short term image management. And so, the psychological and professional effects of this dynamic, they were and are profound, right? Tokenism placed Black Marines in the spotlight, but alone, visible as symbols, but isolated from genuine authority or community. And so this created constant tension, as you talked about, you mentioned earlier, to serve honorably and exceed expectations while knowing your presence was sometimes leveraged more for the organization's public image than for your potential or the benefit to your community. So this understanding reframes racial progress as not just numerical representation or symbolic milestones, but as the genuine integration of marginalized voices into the fabric of institutions and leadership. It calls for accountability, continuous self examination, and a commitment to authentic change, ensuring that progress is measured by empowerment and agency rather than by mere presence. And so, as I reflect upon this personally, uncovering and naming this pattern deepened my sense of responsibility as a leader and historian, recognizing how easily organizations can substitute appearance for real change. I became just more committed not only to telling these men's stories fully, but Dave, I came to examine, come to examine institutional structures that foster authentic inclusion. It also meant for me realizing that leadership is less about opening doors for newcomers and more about rebuilding walls and tables to ensure everyone has unfettered access to decision making and respect. And so, to end this, by transitioning from tokenism to genuine inclusion, we honor the entirety of humanity and the contributions of all who have served.
Here comes a really hard question. That was sort of a setup, but for emerging leaders who haven't read the book, how can they recognize that in their own commands? And more importantly, what should they be doing to promote real inclusion rather than just that representation? and especially for like the general Dave Armstrong white guy.
Okay. Real inclusion in a leadership context, as I stated, isn't just about representation, right? It's about
Mhm.
participation, influence, and shared dignity. For instance, right, in Contested Valor, I trace how Black Marines navigated institutions that often welcome their labor, but not their leadership. So that distinction is crucial
Mhm.
because inclusion occurs when diverse voices are not only present, but heard, right? And they shape outcomes, right? In practical terms, for a leader, and Dave, for just a general person, that looks like a leader creating environments where people from all backgrounds can challenge ideas, which is a tough one,
Yeah.
can take risk, right? And have their experience valued as assets rather than liabilities. That's what Colonel Jones did for me. He allowed me to challenge ideas. He allowed me to take risks, right, within certain parameters. But this also includes who gets mentored, who is in the room when decisions are made, and who
Mhm.
leads initiatives without having to prove their worth twice over.
Right.
Really, real inclusion requires leaders to confront their own biases, to be intentional about equity, and to design systems that not only invite difference, but also rely on it. And so this inclusion is about history. It's about recognizing that exclusion was engineered.
Right.
And so inclusion must be too. That's a key lesson, right, throughout this when you talked about bravery. Because for the men in the book I wrote, bravery alone wasn't enough. Institutional change was needed to make room for them as full participants in the military project. And the same is true in leadership today. And so there are a couple of things, as you said, hey, what are some things I can give to leaders? Here's what hurts it for sure: erosion of authenticity. So, right, superficial inclusion creates an erosion of authenticity. It creates a lack of genuine belonging. It makes fragile relationships and a fragile culture, right? It ensures that there's a failure to create shared purpose. And there's also the risk of reputational damage and lasting disengagement. It also inhibits institutional learning and growth, which leads to missed opportunities for feedback. You and I talked about that earlier. Like, how am I able to get real feedback? In the end, Dave, when it's superficial, it undermines lasting trust because people recognize when opportunities, respect, and voices are withheld. And without authentic engagement and genuine sharing of power, these relationships remain transactional and fragile, and true community can never take root. And so I believe sustainable inclusion requires ongoing, transparent efforts, rooted in trust, respect, and mutual investment, and to build communities where every individual's presence and contributions are truly valued.
Enjoying Moments in Leadership? Help the project get more guests and reach more listeners by leaving a 5-star rating and a quick review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It literally takes like 5 or 10 seconds to do it, and the reviews really help me to continue bringing in inspiring stories from senior military leaders. Additionally, when these guests see that it's popular or hear about it around their commands, it helps me get them on as guests as well. So thanks. You said the word biases before, and as a white officer, I don't think I have any biases, which is probably one of the biggest problems, right? And I personally, and again, this is my lens. I realize this now that I'm older, I think that I was wrong about this, but I can't go back in my time and say like, wow, I saw this incredibly racist thing happen in the Marine Corps.
Yep.
And I think that my lens is a little bit formed by the fact that I grew up reading books about Vietnam and the draft and the racism. I mean, the overt racism that wasn't even tried. No one even tried to curtail it there. I mean, it's just, and that's what 60 years ago. And I think to myself, okay, wow, I don't think that that's going on at all these days. I mean, so from my perspective, as the maybe completely uninformed, not aware of my own biases, white guy, in my mind, there's been some progress there. But now I'm starting to wonder if that's exactly the point. Maybe I don't see it because I wasn't looking for it, or more importantly, I don't know what to look for. Not that that makes me a bad person, just makes me sort of like, and I'm not even going to say ignorant. I'm just going to say like kind of uninformed or inexperienced. And maybe that's truly my blind spot. So I'm kind of setting up the next question, but from your experience, what are some of the things that white officers could be totally missing or that I could have totally missed? The things that are obvious to Black Marines, but just completely invisible to me. And not because I'm a bad person, just means I don't have the right lens.
That's a really tough question, right? Because you talk about, well, what's missing? I'm not sure there's something that's necessarily missing, right? Because your mandate as an officer is right based on an oath.
Mm-hmm.
And so what comes into play that's absent from the oath is, oh, you're actually going to deal with human beings who have feelings and come from different backgrounds and
Mm-hmm.
have different experiences from you. And so I would just say this: as long as we're leaders, whether white or black, can stick to, I will be open to mentorship, I will be open to what I offer as a leader and what I can leverage is the most important thing. It's really hard to see. I get asked this question a lot, Dave. Like, you apparently dealt with racism. It's really hard to call a person racist. It really is. It's like, how do you do that? Right? Have I felt the sting of discrimination? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And other people saw it as well. It's really hard for me to really call something racist. It's a strong statement. It's one you have to have evidence for in a way that's directed at you. May it have been indirect? Probably. But like you, Dave, I was never looking for it whenever I approached something, right? I just saw, okay, why does it seem that this person never has to go through what I'm going through, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
definitely, I could identify discrimination easily. I could identify that. And so, and I know we may talk a little bit about this later, but I think it's important that I share with you how I mentor people with that, if that's okay. So when I mentor young Marines, particularly Black Marines who excel despite navigating invisible or unspoken institutional friction, right? It requires both empathy and strategy. And I think this is what we're getting at, Dave, when you're asking about white officers. It's the same. I mean, many of these young Marines, Black or white, right? These are Marines who check all the boxes in terms of performance, but still bump into ceilings or assumptions they can't always name, much less challenge directly. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
where I was. And this is for women as well, right? They run into these same issues and I don't want them excluded. So the first thing I do is when I encounter something like that, and this is also speaking to white officers who are trying to find the answers. I'm not saying I have them, but I have a little bit to contribute to that, right? And like I said, the first thing I do is affirm their experience. I name the friction for what it is, not as a deficit in them, but as a reflection of historical and systemic dynamics that I lay bare in the book Contested Valor as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that affirmation alone, it can be powerful. I don't know how useful it always is for people, but it tells them that they're not imagining things, right? And that they're not alone. Second, I mentor with dual lenses, one focused on institutional fluency, the other on self preservation and authenticity. I try to help them understand how power works formally and informally so they can navigate it with precision. In addition, I encourage them to lead from a grounded sense of self rather than contorting who they are to fit into someone else's mold, right? And that
Mm-hmm.
was a struggle for me, Dave, as a lieutenant, because that created a tension between fitting in and standing out, right? Because those are real things, especially for me as a young Black officer. I mean, out of 2,000 people, when I went to Tucson, I was the only Black infantry officer. I think we only had three Black officers total when I arrived at 2-7. One was a captain. No, when I got there, there were only two of us. The other guy was an intel officer. He was a captain. I was a second lieutenant. and he left, and then I was a first lieutenant, and a second lieutenant came in, and we were the only two black officers out of 2,000 people. And so when I try to teach these things, my primary intention is to coach them through it, not just with advice, but by modeling how to lead with both integrity and impact. And so for emerging leaders, regardless of what color they are or ethnic background they are, I mean, the takeaway is this: mentoring isn't about molding someone in your image. It's about helping them fully realize themselves in spaces that weren't necessarily built with them in mind. It takes listening, like I mentioned earlier, but more importantly, humility and the willingness to challenge the culture even as you operate within it. And sometimes it means using your credibility to create space for them to be seen, heard, and promoted on their terms. And so, to me, that's leadership, not just managing talent, but liberating it.
Yeah, interesting. In the book, you said that the story of Black Marines is, quote, silent but significant. And I'm wondering for emerging leaders listening to this, I'm asking these questions because they're hard for me, right? Like, and credit to Reggie McClam for being the first person to give me kind of permission to ask the questions with zero fear of
That was a
asking.
great podcast, by the way.
God,
Reggie was
it's
awesome.
great. And I'll tell you that the thing that he said to me that stuck with me more than anything, and may have been a pivotal moment in my lens changing, was when he said, I tell everybody, but he was referring to the Black Marines, saying, I'm not asking you to change who you are. I'm asking you to change how you are. You're asking to join our group, our Marine Corps, and no one's telling you that you need to change who you are, but we are mandating that we change how you are, and it's you are going to adhere to the Marine Corps standards, and that's kind of what. And when he said that, I just thought to myself, God, I wish somebody had said that to me 30 years ago, because I thought it was a really great statement. So again, I'm asking these questions because I want emerging leaders to hear the question and the answer so that they can be better. That's the whole point of the project anyway, right? But now I have this unique opportunity to talk about something specific. And so for emerging leaders to listen to this with the silent but significant, what lessons do you think that those overlooked stories can teach about, presence, resilience, leading in the margins, and what did it mean for you personally to uncover those voices, and how, if at all, did it change your sense of responsibility as a leader?
Okay. Again, some of this will sound like the academic in me. It's
Well,
just
yeah, that's
natural.
why I introduced you as Dr. McCoy for this part of the right.
So I won't try to really make this beyond the reach of the general audience in a way that, right, gets pushed too much into the book. But when you bring up presence, resilience, and leading with integrity and marginalized spaces, right? These men in the book Contested Valor, their experiences marked by perseverance amid discrimination and exclusion, right? This is perseverance. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they demonstrate that authentic leadership often develops at the margins. It does. That's what you're highlighting, right? You're highlighting that right now, where individuals must find purpose and maintain dignity even when their efforts are unrecognized by the mainstream. And so for these men, and today it applies today, Dave, being present for them meant carrying pride in their identity and contributions despite systemic efforts to minimize their impact. And there are many people who still feel that in today's core. Nevertheless, they showed that presence is not just about visibility, right? But about standing firm in the face of adversity and maintaining your core values, regardless of whether history is paying attention or not. Their stories revealed that resilience is forged not just on the battlefield or in combat, but in daily struggles and challenges for recognition and just simply equal treatment. And so, for these men and subsequent generations that you and I are talking about now, and that we are a part of, right? They confronted prejudice both within the military and beyond, yet they continued to serve with distinction. And that's what, Reggie McClam is bringing up, right? It's how you serve. You can still serve with distinction. And often these men and people excel where others expected them to fail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their persistence, their ethical standards, and refusal to be defined by the limits others placed on them set a powerful example of how to endure and not just endure, but thrive in challenging environments. And so leadership in the margins demands adaptive thinking.
Yeah.
It demands a willingness to seek mentorship and community, right? We keep going back to that. And
Right.
an unwavering sense of honor, even when formal acknowledgement is denied. And so, on a personal level, as you asked me, uncovering these silenced voices changed my understanding of leadership and responsibility. It did. It was an emotional journey for me, but hearing and writing these Marine stories compelled me to reflect on my own role as a leader, not just to seek advancement, but to use my platform to amplify overlooked contributions and confront institutional blind spots. It instilled a duty to mentor the next generation. I hope I'm doing pretty good at that. And to foster environments where no one's particular valor, bravery, or courage is contested or ignored. And so it also made clear that knowing our full history in the Marine Corps, especially its margins, deepens the sense of collective responsibility, not simply to recognize, but also honor the people who serve, not just those already celebrated. And that's where I see that. I mean, in short, these stories teach us that authentic presence, impactful resilience, and conscientious leadership are most needed and most meaningful when carried out at the margins
Hmm.
for the benefit of those still fighting to be seen.
You are absolutely right to recognize that we could also be talking about women here. And I don't want that lost in the conversation because I think there's a lot of institutional friction that they deal with as well. Would love to have some more guests on that would be willing to openly talk about that, like you're talking about this. But in terms of mentoring young Marines, and I'm going to say, especially maybe women and Black Marines who are high performers, right? But they're still navigating that unspoken institutional friction. I'm going to use that word again. How do officers mentor down like that, and what can other emerging leaders learn from how you approach those relationships?
Dave, I think I mentioned it just before your last question, right? Just taking this dual lens, right? Where we have to be fluent in the institution.
Hmm.
We have to be fluent in authenticity.
Right.
A lot of times we come across, there are a lot of buzzwords right? You run into,
Yeah.
we look at all these buzzwords, right? Discipline, integrity, initiative, right? And there are Marine Corps
And now
troops
empathy, and
leadership
now empathy, right? Because
right now,
empathy just
empathy, but we
that's,
can't add that one as J did tie buckle, right? We can't. It's tough to add another E in there.
I know but I think it's JJ did Ty Buckley now.
Yeah,
That's all I can
yeah,
come up with.
right. So these can't simply be buzzwords, right? They have to be lived traits, right? They have to be grafted into the DNA of every leader, which is not always easy, right? You brought up some excellent points about people come in at different stages and different points of life, different ages, right? Married, single, divorced, it doesn't matter. Different views on life. And so one of the things is when, like I said, is just how to become more fluent in that.
Right.
It's understanding and having a willingness to be humble, right? Humility is not something that's a hallmark most of the time when it comes to Marine Corps leadership. I believe that it's emerging more and more, or maybe it just has a different title, right? We title it as servant leadership, right? We really like that term, not just in the military, but also in the civilian sector, being a
Hmm.
servant leader. But sometimes that gets a little wobbly of how we define service and how we're defining leadership rather than simply management. And that's where I believe understanding how to become fluent is really important, right? And understanding how power works, right, in informal and formal ways, because you have to be able to drive this ship, navigate it with precision. And it's not always precise. It's tough to always get basically a clean kill when it comes to leadership, right? It's always a messy, a messy outcome, especially when you are not fluent, right? It's a cleaner kill when you're fluent, but when you're illiterate in what it takes to have the fluency and exercise empathy and strategy, right, it makes it much better. It's not a perfect system, right? But it's one in which, hey, it's a lot easier for me to ride my bike with the chain oil than with the chain dry. And it's just that oil that is, right, the lubricant that you need in order to puncture rigidity. And I think that's what ends up happening most of the time, right? We look at these circumstances and we look at mentoring as a rigid construct of, okay, I just picked him or I picked her. They're now supposed to help me blossom in 17 specific ways, right?
Hmm.
Where it's just having to understand that and just listening. And a lot of times we just lack the patience, right? Because we often reflect back on how we were treated when we were in that position. And I always state to young people who are coming in or becoming officers, when they ask me questions, I oftentimes tell them, listen, I think there are a few staples to leadership, but remember, I'm dated information, right? I am dated information. So what I tell you that worked, I mean, you got to recognize, I shared this. I said, the first 20 years of my career were all combat. The nation was at war the entire time. And it sounds silly and it's humorous at times, but it's how do I liberate people within this construct so that they do emerge in ways that are fulfilling for them in this thing we call the Marine Corps, our beloved Marine Corps. And so it's just trying to get encouraging people and trying to get them to really lead from a grounded spot, right? And it goes back to what you and I talked about and what Reggie McClaren brought up earlier, right? You don't need to contort yourself to fit into some other mold, but it's like, how are you going to take what you have and incorporate it into the larger structure, this larger, this larger wheel? What cog will you fit?
Yeah. My last question for Dr. McCoy here, and then I'm going to jump back over to your Marine Corps life. The book was awesome. And
Thank you.
here's the question: what do you hope a reader takes away from Contested Valor that isn't just historical knowledge? Because as fascinating as that is, I think there is something deeper there. But so if it's not the historical knowledge, but more of a principle or a mindset that they can take away that they can apply as emerging leaders in today's force.
Dave, what I want readers to take away from Contested Valor isn't just a better understanding of African American Marines or the military's racial history. I hope they get a more profound sense of moral clarity about leadership itself. So, if that's the principle they get, just moral clarity about leadership itself. And because the book is fundamentally about the difference between being allowed to serve and being invited to lead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a distinction we grapple with today. The key lesson I want emerging leaders to learn is this: leadership is less about rank, execution, or technical skill. It's more about having the courage to face discomfort, humanize those on the margins, and see institutional friction as a prompt for reform, not just something to endure. And the Marines in Contested Valor didn't just serve with honor, they served while dealing with mistrust, surveillance, and tokenism.
Yeah.
Yet they still upheld the mission, the Constitution, and each other. And this duality of both belonging and facing seemingly insurmountable challenges is the crucible in which resilient, reflective leadership is forged. So, if there's a mindset I'd urge leaders to embrace, is this: lead with historical awareness, relational humility, and a fierce commitment to justice. Recognize that the institutions we inherit carry both values and wounds. And it's their responsibility not just to operate within them, but to leave them more just, more inclusive, and more courageous than they found them. That's what I would urge.
I'm going to share with you what I took away from the book because there was the historical knowledge, obviously, but it wasn't really a principle or a mindset. It was a realization. And this is a little bit painful for me to say, but I look back on my career, which was unusual, right? Active duty, reserve, artillery guy, tank guy, LAR guy, all over the map, right? Had a great career, a lot of fun, met a lot of great people. Don't really have any regrets at all about my career. My only regret is that it didn't go longer than it did. And what I took away from the book was a realization that when I look back on my career, I can't now help but wonder if I wasn't a white guy, would my career have been exactly the same? Or would it have been different and more difficult? Or maybe not even possible at all? I don't know the answers to any of those questions, but it definitely made me wonder about them.
Dave, I appreciate that. And that's vulnerable. Oftentimes people don't like hearing this, but we don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't know. But one of the things that I admire and respect about you is that you live in reflection, you take inventory. That's a sign of solid and effective leadership. And as long as we have that and we can look forward to, all right, I, I'm I'm going to ensure that as I move forward, that I recall, hey, my career could have been very different if I may have looked different, maybe if I sounded different, or maybe if I just had a different framework or life view. And so from that standpoint, I would walk away and say this, Dave. I would say the first thing is have gratitude for being able to have had a career. Yes, it may not have gone as long as you wanted, but there was friction that you dealt with. And listening to dozens of your podcasts and even today, just our conversation, you dealt with some friction that I never had to deal with, right? Or maybe I just minimized it, but you did have to deal with that friction, right? And it probably did get in the way of how you define progress for yourself. Friction comes in so many different flavors. That's the great thing. They have more than Baskin Robbins 31 flavors when it comes to friction,
Yeah.
right? And so I think just the friction is translated differently as we, march through these careers. Because there's things I have friends who just never had certain experiences and they look at me and they're like, how did you get that experience? And they wish they'd had it. And I talk to them about trade-offs. I'm like, oh, there were trade-offs to having that experience though.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
sure I'd want them again. And so, Dave, when I listen to you, I always think to myself, like, Dave's highlighting a lot of trade-offs. And so those trade-offs either they offer you or they catch up to you. And so I think we're always just trying to figure that out, Dave. It's tough to know if they pay it off, right? But we can easily recognize when they catch up to us.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, it was just for listeners who don't know the story. I'll tell it real quick so nobody thinks I was a shitbag. But I got out of the Marine Corps without even knowing I was getting out of the Marine Corps. And this is a crazy reserve thing that even career reservists may not understand. But I had a catastrophic knee injury where I tore my ACL and I was going through, surgery and rehab and everything else. And what I didn't realize was that if you're in the IRR and you have are eligible, you're at your 20-year mark, you've satisfied your 20 satisfactory years, and you do not drill out of the IRR for 12 months, you're just retired automatically. I had no idea. I
Way to
had
get up.
I had no idea. And so here I am like doing rehab and I'm thinking, at 54, can I really be a battalion commander in an artillery battery battalion? Yeah, probably because you ride around a lot, but but probably couldn't do it as an infantry battalion commander. But and then all of a sudden I came home one day to a manila envelope in my mailbox with my retirement papers in it. I
Oh,
was like, holy shit, I had no idea what was happening. And I tell the story with a smile on my face now. It was not funny at the time. I was really upset. and had no idea. But that, when I say my career, that's one of the things I regret I didn't understand the administrative situation that was going on at the time, or I would have done something bad. I just thought I was in the IRR like any other time as a reservist. You're in the IRR. You just taking a little break and getting my knee back under me. But anyway, that's the quick story for people who are listening. I just don't want anybody to think I was a turd. But
Dave, do you think that impacted how you approach this podcast? Do you think that has impacted how you're able to formulate questions and how you're able to really get to these deeper levels that I don't think that a normal podcaster could get to without that experience?
if you're able to chip in a little bit to help the project, please head over to my Supercast support page at mill.supercast.com or through the link in the show notes. Every little bit helps. Now back to the pod. Well, I hope so. I will say that it's amazing to me how many people come to me and say, you should be a guest on your own podcast. Like, and answer all the questions that you ask everybody else. And that we had a very accomplished female captain in the logistics community who's serving in an infantry unit right now out at 7th Marines. And she actually said, one of the things I would love to do is come on and be you and interview you one time. And I was like, that would actually probably be a lot of fun, but maybe people would lose interest in the podcast if they heard me answer all the questions I asked.
Not at all. Not at all.
But I think it does. Here's what it is. And I don't want to turn this into a therapy session, and with you as my doctor, but I was not ready to stop serving. I just wasn't. And I still am not ready to stop serving. Now, when I go out to ITX and I hike up to the top of Machine Gun Hill with nothing but a helmet and my plate carrier on, and I'm huffing and puffing, and I think to myself, I could still do this, right? And I get to the top, I'm like, man, I'm done. But I think to answer your question and stop trying to be funny about it, yeah, I think it does. I think it informs, because I still want to help young leaders be as good as they can be. I want people to learn from the things that I regret doing wrong, my own failures, and frankly, some of my own successes too, so they can either avoid them or emulate them. And I want to set the stage for other people to share literally their moments in leadership that will help other people emulate the wins, avoid the mistakes. And frankly, I know this is going to almost be a sales pitch. I'll turn it into a sales pitch, but I really wish more people would come on and simply talk about their careers and their wins and their losses to help other people be better. And I'm just shocked at how many people are scared to come on. Literally, no, I will not come on. There's no upside for me in coming on. And I think to myself, my God, you probably stand in front of a battalion, or you stand up in front of an EWS class and you talk about your career. You stand up at a mess night, or you stand up at a Marine Corps birthday ball, or you're a guest of honor, and you talk about things like, why wouldn't you do it here? That's a commercial and a bitch all wrapped up into one. But yeah, I think my unceremonious exit from the Marine Corps impacted me emotionally and is one of the driving factors between me wanting to continue to do this project.
Thanks for that response, because I think that's what gives you the energy and the drive. I believe that is what has made moments in leadership so successful, right? It's just that scratch, that itch you have, right? It's always going to be there, right? This eternal chip on your shoulder for it didn't end the way I wanted. And so I want to do everything that I can to ensure that you're ending on the right way. You're coming off the off ramp, the correct off ramp and the right off ramp as you see it coming.
Yeah, and I'll share a quick story because it is kind of funny. I didn't really realize the impact, because all I do is talk and edit and publish. And then I get some emails every now and then and stuff. The first time it really hit on me was when I was actually going over to visit with Colonel McClam when he was the CEO of TBS. And I got some instructions from his aide or his adj or somebody who said, hey, park in this spot. We'll have a Marine come out and get you and bring you up to Colonel McClam's office. Because, by the way, TBS doesn't look anything like it used to when you were there. So you're going to be lost the minute you get here because everything's brand new.
Yeah.
What was the armory for me is now some dilapidated supply warehouse or something like that. It's all different. And so I was walking and nobody was in the parking spot when I got there. So I just figured I was going to walk around. I'm walking down a sidewalk and a Marine comes up to me. He's in camis and says, are you Lieutenant Colonel Armstrong? I said, yes. Are you here to take me to Colonel McClam's office? And he said, no. And I was like, oh. He goes, no, I just recognize you from the podcast and everything. Like, I just want to tell you, I'm a huge fan. And like, my whole company's listening to your podcast and thought it was
That's
really great and all
awesome.
this other stuff. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, can you help me get to Colonel McClellan's office too? So, but it's funny. I was like, how does somebody recognize me on an audio only podcast? I need to turn this into video at some point, but I'm kind of
Yeah,
ugly.
I've been wanting to talk to you about that. When you get your table with the black background and the
Yeah.
microphones, and yeah,
Yeah,
it's just sitting across from each
it's
other.
a massive increase in editing effort. And then really good friend of mine, Justin Kramer, who runs Former Action Guy podcast, he's been a mentor to me throughout this whole thing. He's got a wildly successful podcast. My God, if I had like an eighth of his audience, I'd be happy. And he just said to me, it's like, dude, I don't edit anything. I just publish it. Maybe I just
Let's
need to get
go.
over it. I need to get over it. But so I'm going to wrap up with one final question here about leadership, because your most recent command, you completed a tour at U.S. Cyber Command. Now, this could be one of my biases showing again, but I got to imagine that that command is totally different than an infantry battalion. Just guessing. Okay. What were some of the leadership challenges that you discovered there? Were they accretive to your leadership style? Were there some aha moments there? And then I'd like, to the extent that you finish up with that question, would love for you to address anything that I failed to ask you that you really wanted me to ask you, you really wanted to talk about on the podcast before we wrap up.
So many listeners may not know this, but CyberCon has a huge civilian contingent. And just because you come in as a uniform member, you may have an entire team of civilians, contractors.
Right.
And so, as the CAG director, the director of the Commander's Action Group for Cyber National Mission Force, I came into a team, 7 civilians, and 2 graphic artists. So you're dealing. It's like I've never had to deal with the graphic artists. And then you have on my team, I have every single person on the team, except with the exception of 2, were all retired field grade officers from the Air Force and the Army. I had a Marine and um, a staff sergeant. She had just gotten out of the Marine Corps. And then I had an Army sergeant. He had just got out of the Army. And their level of intelligence is something that really was just outstanding, but their approach and professionalism was very different to work with. And so while I thought I would have to adjust how I spoke to them, I really didn't even have to do that. They all knew their jobs when they came in. They knew exactly what they needed to do. If I needed something, they did it. And most of the time, Dave, they were ahead of it. I mean, before I could even ask, they had it done. And so everyone ranged, the retired field grades ranged from '04 to '06. And being in that type of environment just opened my eyes to really what it means to be on an executive level of leadership,
Mm-hmm.
not just strategic, not operational, not tactical, but executive. And I, that was an adjustment for me. And it took me a good 4 months before I really got the rhythm of how this functioned and operated with civilians. So doing that with civilians and them having a very good understanding and grasp of military culture, also understood how to leverage me. And like my leadership was no different. I still had to make sure I sifted through BS for them. I also had to stand in front and take face shots for them because sometimes, hey, we were late on things. This team, they worked extremely hard. And so, really, I mean, 98% of my time was just spent with these civilian contractors. And they take pride in their work. They will not turn in something or send something up that has their name on it. They will not. They will ensure that it is at an executive level of presentation. And so for me, my leadership just shifted in that way of, oh, you're essentially an executive and you're leading an executive team. And so for me, that was just new being a post command, post PME, lieutenant colonel, and then I got selected for colonel, and understanding how I'm viewed by them. And they relied on me to be able to be not only their shield, but also their sword.
Right.
So that was something that really I believe Dave has helped me and positioned me for being a colonel. And who knows if I get '06 command or not. I mean, that's not the most important thing. But I did think about that. I thought to myself, if I did get '06 command, I think I'm well prepared for it.
Yeah.
And if I had to be on a staff again as a colonel, I feel very confident I would be okay. And so it's always balancing that thing, Dave, where people will ask you, well, how good are you, Cameron? As because I have a PhD or something like that, how smart. And so if I say no, I'm excellent at what I do, right? Then you're bragging.
Hmm.
But then if I say, hey, I'm not very good, I'm poor at it, I'm lying. So let me put it this way. When I approach something, I have no fear. If you put me in any billet moving forward, I have zero fear about doing it well and excel. And I believe that's what this last tour did for me.
Oh, that's great. That's awesome. I said that was going to be the last question, but it's not because I just thought of one more. But this is a quick one you can answer for me. What is the crown jewel command for an '06 in the reserves?
Oh, it's not available. It's not
Yeah, well,
available, Dave.
is
I
it
think so.
regimental command
Oh,
or like
yes,
yeah,
I
it's not
have
right.
shared. So Brigadier General Raymond Adams, he and I've talked. He's made time for me. Incredible, incredible mentor and leader, along with Major General Doug Clark and Major General Sean Day. They've been pivotal in my career in the reserves.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, Sean's a former Anglico guy, and I've met him a few times through General Bellin. Doug Clark, I know just from my LAR days. I don't recognize Adam's names. I'm assuming he's somewhere in the Mar 4 Res structure.
He's currently at NATO,
Oh,
and
okay.
so in Norway. But those three men have really been pivotal to just my growth and adjustment in the reserves and navigating it. Right, there's just so much to navigate, as you know.
Right.
But one of I if I was in charge for a day, there are only two regiments: 23rd Marine Regiment, 25th
Right.
Marine Regiment, and I've volunteered. I said I would be regimental commander if you wanted to. We do a year, 18 months, but those are not available for reservists. They have active duty
Right.
colonels who want to do that. But that's a hard one, right? It would. I don't know, Dave. I honestly don't know. It depends on where one's interests are. And
Yeah.
so for me, and I'm not going to give away my secrets of what I put down on my list, so I'm going
Okay. Well, I wasn't going to ask you for that anyway. Yeah.
to, but oh, I knew you wouldn't. But in the reserves, it's like what's available. It's just what's
Right.
available.
Yeah. It's just
I,
right.
yeah, it's just on this year these things are available. But I would love to be regimental commander
Yeah.
if that was available. I'd love to compete for it. Again, I mean, the Marine Corps may say, not this year, Cameron, or not next year, and not the year after that. But I think as an '06 commander, I think that would be an incredible opportunity to truly be able to go out and serve battalion commanders and save them from making mistakes I made as a
Right.
battalion commander and just being able right to receive their mistakes, right? Not a lack of discipline, and while that could happen, but to be able to just to be there and really be able to mentor them in the ways that I receive. And so I really would like to just give that gift back. And I think that would be the crown jewel of just being truly able to be the commander of other battalion commanders and leading a regiment through on so many levels through regimental XO and watching them navigate through these things and shepherding them through putting your arm around them and saying, you know what? In 5 years, you're going to look back on this and laugh. And you're going to say to yourself, how was I so stupid? Like, why didn't I just listen? And so I think that would be really neat to do.
Yeah. That's great. In my fantasy land, if I had stayed on active duty, I'm convinced that I would have been the first artillery MEU commander. I would have made that happen. I have made a career out of making things happen that I want to have happen for myself. And I'm telling you, everybody listening to this could laugh and you'll never know. But I'm telling you,
Yeah.
I think that would have been my dream, and I would have
Yeah, I think on
pushed and
active
pushed and
yeah,
pushed for that.
on
Yeah,
active duty, yeah, I've talking to a lot of my peers. Being a MU commander is the pinnacle for them. Like
yeah,
that's for them. It's the pinnacle.
yeah. I agree. Well, thanks so much for coming on,
Of course,
Lieutenant Colonel McCoy, Colonel Select, doctor who covered everything, accomplished author. This was a really great time. I appreciate your time and your candor, especially putting up with some of my questions. I look forward to getting together with you next time you're back here in your stomping grounds of Washington, D.C.